So, citizenship. What an interesting idea, that instead of being subjects of a state, we are fellow citizens. I believe we need to re-emphasize the importance of citizenship. This idea of what it means to be American is deteriorating, and it is the job and duty of the citizens to prevent and stop it. In fact, they are the only ones who can. A nation that cannot control who enters the country and who becomes a citizen is not sovereign. It's that simple. It's clear, however, that progressive liberalism no longer views self-preservation as the rational goal of the nation-state. Rather, in the view of ideological liberalism, self-preservation and national security must be subordinate to openness and diversity. America's immigration policies, we are assured, should demonstrate our commitment to diversity because an important part of American character is openness. And our commitment to diversity is an affirmation of who we are as Americans. To that, I would argue the same thing that Teddy Roosevelt argued back in 1915. There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. When I refer to hyphenated Americans, I do not refer to naturalized Americans. Some of the very best Americans I have known were naturalized Americans, Americans born abroad. But a hyphenated American is not an American at all. The only absolutely certain way of bringing a nation to ruin, of preventing all possibility of its continuing to be a nation at all, would be to permit it to become a tangle of squabbling nationalities. An intricate knot of Germanic Americans, Irish Americans, English Americans, French Americans, Scandinavian Americans, or Latin Americans. Each preserving its separate nationality, each at heart feeling more sympathy with Europeans of that nationality than with other citizens of the American Republic. There is no such thing as a hyphenated American who is a good American. The only man who is a good American is the man who is American and nothing else. Now, we have to make it clear that consent, not the accident of birth, is the basis for American citizenship. American citizens, however, can of course consent to allow others to join the compact that created the American nation. They have the sovereign right to specify the terms and conditions for granting entry and the qualifications for citizenship. Now, presumably, the qualifications for citizenship and naturalization will be whether or not those who wish to enter demonstrate the capacity to adopt the habits and manners of independence and self-reliance of Republican citizens and devotions to the principles that unite the American people. Furthermore, it would not be unreasonable to expect that potential immigrants should possess useful skills or professions that will ensure they will not become victims of the welfare state. Of course, the welfare state is quite an interesting thing that probably shouldn't exist, but we'll talk more about that in a different video. And I think that oftentimes those who are born American know less about their country than fully assimilated immigrants do, And somehow we've come up with this crazy idea that as soon as you turn 18, you get to vote. I'm of the opinion that if you're born American, that's all well and good, but if you want to fully participate in the Republican process, if you want the privilege to vote, because that's what it is, it's a privilege, not a right, you should have to take a government-issued U.S. history test, as well as read certain pieces of traditional American literature on Western philosophy and culture. And if you fail and still want to vote, you can take a free U.S. history course before taking the test again. Now, libertarians, while simultaneously arguing for private property rights and the your house is your castle doctrine, which I believe in, by the way, think that immigrants shouldn't have to assimilate and should enjoy the same freedom and liberty that you enjoy. Not understanding that by just letting foreigners in, we are slowly degrading and ultimately destroying those freedoms that we do so enjoy here in the United States. Many people argue that America is a melting pot and we have no culture. I respectfully disagree. Just because anyone can come to America and become an American doesn't mean that becoming an American has no meaning. And we tend not to understand this because we're so used to American culture. But America is not the natural state of being. America is not normal. It's exceptional. Maybe I'll make a video on that later. American exceptionalism. The United States isn't just an idea. It cannot be copied or emulated anywhere else in the world. The United States was founded on certain principles that had never been the principles of any other nation on earth. Individualism, the rule of law, and the idea that all men are created equal. Had it not been for these elements in our culture, we wouldn't be America. And the left tends to ignore this. They believe it to be offensive and untrue to pretend that some cultures are better than or superior to other cultures. And that's a charming idea, it really is. But the reality is that every day, more and more people are fleeing their cultures in order to enter our culture. And that's great, it really is. And we allow that, provided that they assimilate to American culture because we like it how things are here, and frankly, we know that our culture is superior. Okay, on to the next point. The left continually argues that we should go back to handling immigration similar to the times of Ellis Island. They like to romanticize about Ellis Island as the landmark of immigration because they'll say that, oh, most people that arrived at Ellis Island were processed in a matter of hours, and there were no immigration laws. Okay, so firstly, that's just wrong, and secondly, I completely agree with them that we should go back to doing things the way they used to be back then. So, the entire time that Ellis Island was processing immigrants from 1892 to 1954, they only received about 12 million people. 12 million! In 62 years, that is literally nothing compared to the 1 million plus immigrants we now receive yearly. And while sure it was a landmark for immigration, it was also a landmark for deportation. They systematically evaluated potential immigrants to determine whether or not they would become a burden to the country. And if they determined that you were going to be a burden to the country, you were deported. And the people that they did determine were liable to become public charges had to go to a room called the hearing room. and they would have to convince the board that they were not going to be a burden to the country. Now, compare those common sense and reasonable immigration laws to today, where migrant encounters at the US-Mexico border have reached a 21-year high. The number of monthly encounters had fallen to 16,000 in April 2020, shortly after the coronavirus outbreak forced the closure of the southwestern border and slowed migration across much of the world. But migrant encounters have climbed sharply since then, reaching nearly 200,000 in July, according to the latest data from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So, in conclusion, I think we need to reemphasize the importance of citizenship. To be an American is a privilege, not a right, and it is not the right of the world to cross our borders whenever they feel the urge to do so. Assimilation is important, because without it, we lose our culture, our ability to be self-sustaining citizens, and with that, we lose our country.